Welcome to Creative Conversations. I'm really honored today to be joined by the amazing Kevin Kendle. I've been a massive long-time fan for decades actually. And Kevin's a much-loved composer of ambient and instrumental music.
Well, thanks for the lovely introduction, Ian. It's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
You have a lot of albums that are very melodic, and you have your other, I think you call it your Deep Skies series, which are very atmospheric. Can you describe the differences in those two approaches?
Well, I started off creating music in 1992, which was kind of very inspired by nature, and I still do that style of music as well. And at the time, my studio setup, it kind of lived in boxes under a bed. We lived in a one-bed flat, so I'd have to literally set it up, get it all out of the boxes into the lounge, set it up on a Monday night. I'd work Tuesday, Wednesday, possibly Thursday, then take it down on Friday. So it was the lounge was clear for the weekend. Poor Julie, my wife, she's very patient with me. And in order to make it worthwhile going through all of that, I used to sort of work by composing in my head a lot of the time. Melodies would appear, and I sort of work on arrangements in my head. And so it was I knew what I was going to do, but I went to all that effort. So my first probably 4 albums were done in that flat using that process. And I've sort of carried that through. And the album I'm working on at the moment is very much like that. I'm sort of bringing things into the real world that I've been going around my head for a while. Now I have a studio in my main place in Baldock in Hertfordshire, Eventide Studios. What you see here is my pop-up studio, as I call it, in my cottage in Norfolk, which I call the Cloud Sanctuary. I did an album called Cloud, so there's a tie in there, and it is a sanctuary. So so that's how I work with the nature-based stuff. As far as the space music stuff goes, that's a bit of a different approach. I'll still start with an overall concept for the album. For example, the first Deep Skies album was inspired by Orion, the constellation. I discovered a fantastic picture. I think it's the Travis Rector photograph of the Horsehead Nebula. And it just blew my mind when I discovered that this was real, a real place in space, not CGI. It was real, you can see all the nebulas and mist happening, over sort of light years of space, but it kind of looks like a place,
Amazing.
So that was the inspiration behind that. And then the more I researched the constellation of Orion, the more I discovered, red supergiants, blue supergiants, the belt stars, all their different names, where the nebulas were around the stars. So that was the inspiration. The sounds, I couldn't actually manifest the sounds that I wanted to that I could hear in my head until about 2002, 2003, where synthesizers had evolved to the point where finally I could actually produce the sounds that I heard in my head. And I wanted to I'd always had in my head to make space albums. Just wasn't physically able to do it up to that point. The starting point for those is a particular sound. So I would sort of, rather than have anything specific in my head, I knew roughly what I wanted to do. I'd need to discover a sound trigger that would I could create the wash that I wanted, and then start building the space soundscapes up from that for those albums. That's pretty much how I work. And the effects, I can't overstress how important effects are in that music. If you were to turn all the effects off in the Deep Skies music, you just wouldn't recognize it.
Really?
I think there's a bit actually on the second Deep Skies album. I think it's the Trifid Nebula track. It's got this lovely misty sort of wash in it. It's a pretty hilarious sound, actually. I think it's called Swinging Hoses. It's based on a
excellent,
and it's actually made with a sample of Swinging Hoses. It sounds nothing like. So I always say to people, use effects. Don't just take the output of your synthesizer and use that. Use effects, echoes, reverbs. You can dramatically beautify the most basic sounds. So
Yeah.
hopefully that explains the difference in the two approaches, really. One's very much composing in the head, and the other one is experimenting with sounds more, you know.
Well, that sounds like a really beautiful balance, actually. And
Yes, I mean, I'm still doing both styles. Sometimes I sort of get into the space vibe, you know, and I work for maybe a year or two on space music.
yeah,
And then, you know, I'm still massively inspired by nature. I mean, you can't beat a sunset. It's
yeah,
just crying out to be turned into music, you know, and things like that.
yeah,
The album I'm working on at the moment is inspired by the landscapes here in Norfolk in England, and
beautiful.
beautiful landscapes.
Mm,
So I've taken sort of a few actual places and then hinted at other things in other tracks. We're about 5 tracks through at the moment, so it's going well.
wow. Oh,
But yeah,
that's brilliant. One of the things I've always really appreciated about your work is your level of production is top notch.
well, thank you.
Um, and which I think is super important with instrumental music anyway, isn't it? Because um, it's because we don't rely on lyrics and vocals
Yeah,
overly. Um,
it's got to sound great. Yeah,
the production really does play a massive part in it, and I
yeah.
know you've always been particularly super strong in that area.
Well,
Yeah,
thank you very much. I'm self-taught in that area. I do work in a slightly different way to a lot of people in that because the actual sound is so important,
mm,
especially with the space stuff, for example. It's the sound rather than the melodies. You know, it's crucial that it sounds right.
yeah,
So I don't work in the usual way of kind of, you know, um, demoing, laying down tracks, mixing as separate processes. It kind of all happens at once, if you like.
yeah,
So as I build up my layers, I'm adding the right reverb for that sound when I'm playing the actual melody
mm,
because I find it very hard to see how you could, for example, put a flute part down. When I say a
yeah,
flute part, it's played from a keyboard, all my stuff is played from synthesizers and samplers and things.
yeah,
But if that reverb wasn't on it,
yeah,
I would play it in a completely different way.
yeah,
So for me, that reverb has to be there from the start.
yeah,
So therefore, that's also almost part of the mixing process done as well.
yes, yes,
And then any sort of parts that I'm pads or bass sounds and things, I will place very big importance on background sounds.
yeah,
To me, a lot of stuff can be kind of foreground and in your face,
yeah,
and I try to give sort of 3D depth
yeah, nice,
by creating washes in the background. So often I will start with those.
yeah,
And again, the reverbs and echoes are all there from the word go.
yeah,
So, and then I build up the other parts and sit them where they should be in the mix. So it's kind of the mixing, composing, arranging, recording is all happening as one process. So when
yeah,
all the parts are there, it's pretty much done. There's no separate real mixing stage to go through. So that's maybe one aspect of how I work differently to the
yeah.
conventional way.
It makes a lot of sense because you're really contextualizing everything as you go. And if you didn't have all those effects playing their part, you wouldn't necessarily write the next part in the way that you do because everything's informing each other,
Yeah,
isn't it?
that's
So,
right. And the way a sort of reverb sits against another sound,
mm,
the tails, the way they sort of blend into one another. Sometimes, you know,
mm,
that sort of thing is overlooked.
yeah,
I feel, you know, and I think sometimes if that reverb tail, for example, you know, went on a bit longer, it would just cover that little gap between
yeah,
sections and all this sort of thing, you know.
yeah. Your music just breathes so beautifully too, and I think that's it's probably got a lot to do with how therapeutic your music is as well. I know for me personally, there's although I love all styles of music, very broad range of music. There's only a few go-to artists that I will choose to listen to or to be with musically if I'm feeling ill or feeling like I need to rejuvenate, or I'm not feeling quite right. And you're one of them. You're one of the
Oh, thank you.
artists that I I just I just get what I need to help me get back to that state of balance.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, I do live and breathe music, and I have done since, since I've been a child, really.
Yeah,
My parents spotted an ability when I must have been about 6 or 7 and sent me to piano lessons at the age of 8.
yeah,
But apparently, I used to sing like the harmony to a nursery rhyme or a school hymn or something. I wouldn't sing the main melody.
yeah.
So there was something there, definitely.
It's
But
amazing what.
what you're hearing in my music is what I do.
Yeah,
I don't work in any other styles really. So
you're fairly quick, aren't you, with your, the time frames that your music comes together.
yes, once I get going, once the blank canvas, if you like, is overcome, that's always a fairly terrifying prospect. As is like the void, I call it, between albums. When you come down from the high of having a new album out and it's all there, you think, what the hell am I going to do next?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
sometimes it can be
yeah,
quite a long gap. So I'll go for 6, 7 months without touching a keyboard sometimes. And then all of a
yeah, right.
sudden there'll be something will inspire you.
Yeah.
You'll see something, or sometimes just a melody will just stop. What's happening? There's a
Hmm.
tune in my head. Have I heard it before? No, it's a new one.
Yeah,
And you start. A lot of the preparatory work, as I say, for the nature stuff, is done up here.
yes.
And then you finally sort of get into the studio and you think, okay, when do I press record? You choose what sound you're going to use, how
Mm.
you're going to start a track off. That's another big thing. I normally start with either a piano or a guitar, sort of putting down the chordal bass, if you like.
Yeah.
So that first time you press record is pretty terrifying.
Yeah.
But once that's down, and then you start building up, and it's going well. It's whoosh.
Mm.
Sometimes I'll have a track finished, as good as finished, in a day,
Wow.
and sometimes it'll be more likely 2 days.
Wow. Yeah,
But
that is amazing.
often longer than that. Some tracks are,
Mm.
difficult so and so's, and require a
Mhm.
bit more work
I,
getting everything right. But the other thing I'll do is when I've done that, is do a mix down of the track, and listen to it on headphones,
mm.
traveling up and down
Yeah.
in trains and cars and whatever, and really get to know it. And then more often than not, there'll be a tiny little thing that probably no one else would notice, but it's annoying me.
Yeah,
And I'll
yeah,
go back and I'll put that
yeah,
right, or I'll
yeah,
redo a part. I think I could maybe get that slightly better, or
yeah,
that note's too, I didn't hit that hard enough, for emphasis, and it just hasn't
yeah.
got the right emotional content there. It needs to be a bit of vibrato maybe on that particular note. Small things,
Mm.
but I'll go back and change them, because my sort of ethos is I don't release anything unless I'm as happy with it as I can be.
Mm.
Once I get to that stage, then I put it out there. My
Yeah,
that bit is the bit that takes the long time.
yeah, yeah.
Just being happy with it.
The
The
time factor.
actual, yeah, the as I say, the actual recording process is quite fast once it gets going. A couple of
Yeah.
days.
I bet there's a lot of people who wouldn't realize just the intricacy and the detail that you're listening to and processing in your mind to know when it's ready. And it's only when it's absolutely ready. And I think we're both
Yes,
pretty tough on quality control,
it's
because
paramount for
we've got to
me. Yeah.
live with it forever, so you don't want to release it till it's ready.
Yeah, it's going to speak for me in future years when I'm no longer around. So I want it to
Yeah,
be as best as yeah,
exactly, yeah. And
yeah. No, it's paramount.
yeah. Another thing
Paramount. Yeah,
that interests me is your ability to hear so much of a piece in your head, it more or less in completion. Like that's something I
yeah, pretty
don't do
much.
very much at all. That's quite a skill to be able to kind of hold the whole thing in your mind. Have
Well,
you always worked like that?
certainly, as I say, in the early days, I had to work like that because it was such a hassle putting the recording stuff up in the lounge and messing the house up for a while, you know. So in order to, I wasn't just going to tinker around and not get
Right.
anything done. So I did work like that in those early days, and on the nature-based stuff throughout, really. One recent example is a track that people won't be familiar with yet, but will be on the forthcoming album called Norfolk Landscapes, which
Yeah.
I've been working on this week. And it's a culmination of probably a year's work, but I only spent like a day and a half doing the actual recording so far.
Oh,
There's more
wow.
work to do, I should add.
Yeah.
But it was, you know, I was out on a walk, I think it was last June, would have been 2021, round here. And there's a particular spot where what I call them the magic tree. And it's just a tree, but it transforms in June, July because the sun goes down directly behind it and it just looks exquisite.
Yeah.
And first time I saw this, I was on a proper high.
Yeah.
And you know, after I watched the sun go down, carried on with the walk, you know, feeling a feeling of elation and euphoria, you know, what I just
Yeah.
seen.
Yeah.
And by the time I got back, I'm thinking, you know, there's this tune in my head, you know, is it happening again?
Yeah. Yeah.
And sure enough, you know, I think it was Paul McCartney once said, you know, if you can't remember, you know, if you have to write a tune down, it's not good enough. If you can't remember it the next day, no one else is going to either,
Yeah.
which is a fair point. So, you know,
Yeah.
next day I did remember it and did the walk again and again, grinning like a Cheshire cat as all these ideas were coming in.
That's brilliant.
And it got to the point where I didn't have a chance to sort of sit down and record it. So everything, you know, the arrangement was taking shape, where the chords were going. I'd be tapping on my, you know, like an imaginary keyboard on my thigh as I walk sometimes, working out
Awesome.
where, you know,
Wow.
and
That's
it
cool.
does twist and turn quite a lot chordally, this track. You've just heard it. And you're very kind at doing some guitar on it for me, which is great. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, my
Um,
my honor. Yeah. It's
but,
a great
but
track.
yeah,
It's a great track.
it's kind of strange because it got to the point where I could literally hear everything, the whole arrangement, and it sounded so good in my head. I then got to try and actually bring this into the real world,
Mm, mm.
sounding as good as I could get it the same,
Yeah.
which was, you know, quite a frightening prospect. So I kind of putting it off, thinking, can I actually do this, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
But coming up here is great because I can really focus. I'm in the area where it was inspired.
Mm, mm.
It's a pop-up setup. I mean, these days my studio is basically everything happens on a high-end laptop.
Mm.
So it's great that I can just bring that up here with a couple of synthesizers. I've got all
Yeah.
my plugins and everything on the laptop.
Yeah.
Monitoring systems all up here.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Um, but yes, we managed to get it sounding fairly much like it has in my head. And as I said, there's still work to do, and I'm going to do everything I can to make it sound as good as it did in my head.
That must be
But yeah,
very
I can't
satisfying.
explain how that works. Yeah,
Yeah. It must be both a great relief that it's manifesting how you hear it in your head, and also very satisfying to
yeah.
to be capable of reproducing that too is quite a
When
feat.
when
So
it's kind of, I always say when I finish a track, it is literally the best feeling in the world. There's
mm,
nothing else like it. You know, I can't imagine why people need to take drugs and things because to
yeah,
me,
yeah,
it's the best natural high there is. You know,
yeah,
and it
yeah,
lasts, you know, a few days after a track's finished. You know,
yeah,
I'm
yeah,
kind of still buzzing from it now. You know.
yeah, yeah. It's I know we've spoken in the past about how time takes on a different quality, different dimension, doesn't it?
Oh God, yeah.
I'm sure, like me, you've gone, oh my gosh, it's something o'clock and I haven't eaten for like, I can't remember when I last had some food. Like you're just living off the prana
Absolutely,
of something else, aren't you? You're
very much
living
so.
off
I
the
mean,
energy of it.
literally, yeah. I mean, when I'm recording at home, sometimes Julie, my wife, will force me to eat some sandwiches or
Yeah,
something,
yeah,
and then when I'm up here, I'm generally by myself, and literally, for example, the Monday night just gone. I looked at the clock and it was sort of, 9:15 or something, and I'd only had breakfast. So
Yeah. Oh, really? Wow.
wow,
There you
I need
go.
to stop and eat something. So it was a late dinner, but
Yeah. But
yeah, it's
time is very elastic in that creative process, isn't it? It's
and you're getting more and more inspired, and you get the ideas
yeah,
are coming thick and
yeah,
fast. So you're putting one part down, you're thinking, I know what this needs. As you're playing it, this needs a string part now. I can
mm,
hear a string part, and then
mm,
okay, so straight away you stop that. You then create a new track on the laptop, set up all the instruments and the channels, prime it for record. Off
mm,
you go with that part, and as you're doing that, the next idea, this needs a sort of percussive line I can hear,
yeah,
and you just like it's a roller coaster. It
yeah,
just
yeah,
takes a life on a life of its own, and you need to go with it
yeah.
while it's happening.
So
There's no point in saying, "Oh, I'll come back to that in the morning,"
no, no, absolutely. You got to ride
because
the
it's
wave.
just not going to happen. Yeah,
And
exactly.
you've got yourself in the flow state, and you've we all take X amount of time to get down into that flow state, and so you want to stay there because you've got
Yeah,
yourself there. You want to yeah, ride that wave is probably the best
yeah.
way
So
I can think
when it's
of.
all happening, you've got to go with it.
Yeah, yeah,
It's interesting you say about getting into that state, because there's always the inevitable sort of, why is there no sound coming out the speaker syndrome when you first start?
yeah,
You're all excited and ready to go, and sometimes it can be a bit demoralising at the first stages because you're thinking, why is that? It's not sounding
yeah,
crackly. What's happening? That's either lead broken or the buffer's too small and things are crackling on the digital thing, and then you have to
yeah,
tweak it and work to get everything right. But it's worth persevering, and
yeah.
it only takes an hour or two. But it's always the same.
It's funny, isn't it? Technology, it's our greatest tool, but sometimes our greatest frustration. But that's part of the course. Um,
That's it. It's
and
always worth taking the time to learn the
mm,
hardware and the software, and
mm,
just getting it
yeah,
working.
yeah. You have kindly invited me to play guitar on a couple of tracks on the Norfolk landscapes, which I'm very excited about. And thank you
Me
for
too.
trusting me to do that again. I must say, one of my career highlights has always been playing on Butterflies and Flowers albums of yours.
A classic case of where technology has come on. That when you did those
Yes.
awesome parts for me on those albums, which really make the tracks that they're on. We were sending DAT tapes back to one another, literally from England to Australia,
Yeah.
which would take at least a week to get there.
Yeah.
You then have to listen to that, do your parts over the next couple of weeks, put those parts on DAT tape, then send them back to me. Then
Yeah.
I'd open the envelope, digitally read off the track. It
Put
just
the
took
DAT in.
forever.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But we did it, and it really worked well.
Yeah.
Another. You've just reminded me another point there is that I don't work really to any time scales. Being independent, I have no deadlines. So,
Mm,
whilst sometimes it's useful to have a deadline, I generally don't enforce them on the music side, so it can just run
mm.
its course. And I think that's another really good way of keeping the quality high.
Yeah.
So you're not forced to release something before you're happy with it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I always say, like you're doing the parts for me now. Take as much time as you need, and so you're
Mm.
not under any pressure. I'm not under any pressure. It works so much better.
Yeah. I think we have a built-in knowing of when it's ready, if
Hmm.
it's right. You just kind of go, yeah, no, I
It's
think
an
we're there.
intuitive thing,
Yeah.
isn't it? You can't
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
teach it. Knowing
Yeah.
when to stop is another important
Exactly.
thing as
Exactly.
well.
Yeah. Yeah. I have a bit of
Can't
trouble
overdo
with
it.
that sometimes. Yeah. That is just as important. Um, but I can't believe it's taken us 20 years to between drinks on that. But hey, it's all in the
Time
timing.
flies.
Now's the time's right now, right?
The
So
universe knows when the time's right.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, another thing that I have really enjoyed checking out lately is your live concerts of the Deep Skies
Ah, yeah.
work, and with the amazing Nigel Shaw and Brian Abbott. Now that footage, it looks and sounds absolutely stunning. Um, was that
Thank you.
how was it putting that live situation together? Was that well,
Hmm.
I'm sure it was many things. To me, it looks like it'd be quite daunting just getting it all to come together, but it must have felt amazing once it did.
Definitely. I mean, there's a sort of big story attached to all that, which is sort of documented in the Deep Skies box set. I did a 16-page booklet with the complete story of all that. But to summarise, it was a huge amount of work. I couldn't initially see how on earth we could do it live, but Nigel and Brian, bless them, they're two wonderful musicians. I love them dearly. Kept prodding me. We've got to take this out live, year
Yeah,
on year on year. And eventually, I realised they were serious, you know.
yeah,
And
excellent. Thank goodness they were.
yeah, I started to think, okay, well, how can we do this? Because in my mind, I would need so much equipment because it's music that is 100% born of the studio, that
Mm,
you can't just turn up with a keyboard and play Deep Skies. It just doesn't work
mm,
like that. You need
mm,
all the effects and the effects on each sound. You know, how are we going
mm,
to do this? Then I thought, okay, what we need to do is make backing tracks. So I need to go back to the original
mm.
arrangements, the multi-track arrangements, and
Yeah.
take out all the bits we could do live, the
Mm,
more sort of physical played bits,
mm.
um, and just play to these background washes, you know.
Yeah.
So that therein lies a story in itself, because the soundscape system that I was using to record, totally reliant on hard drives, I had a fairly catastrophic hard drive failure.
Oh dear.
And the way the soundscape system worked, just taking backups was
Oh,
so difficult because a
yeah.
project would exist on two separate hard drives. I don't want to get
Oh,
too technical, but
yeah.
you'd have to make sure that the stuff that was on both drives
Yeah.
was backed up to two separate drives so that if
Right.
you ever needed to replace them. So it was very complicated to work
Yeah.
out what needed, you know. And Windows, the operating system, would not see these drives. It's purely on the soundscape system. Very sort of arcane method of doing it. I occasionally plucked up the courage to spend a day or two doing it.
Yeah.
But yeah, long story short, I did magically find a working backup disc for Soundscape that had all the albums I thought
Oh,
I had
thank
lost.
goodness.
Thank God, otherwise we wouldn't have been able to do it, literally. So I
Wow.
was able to
Really?
go through and restore all those arrangements. And it was, that in itself was weeks of work.
Wow.
Then we had the visual side of things, okay, do we just do this live where people have to look at three guys playing their instruments, quite sort of dull after a couple of hours of sort of spacing out to how you're going
Yeah.
to keep the sort of interest there. So
Yeah.
I thought about the visual side of things, and what I decided to do was try and create some animated video to give the impression of traveling through some of these amazing places that inspired the albums in the first place. And I managed to
Beautiful.
do that by getting lots of static images from the Hubble telescope, NASA website, and things like that, high resolution. So you could kind of zoom in really close,
Yeah.
and then
Right.
they would, over about 2 or 3 minutes, gradually turn round and zoom out
Yeah.
and put
Nice.
them in transparency over something in the background. So it looks like there's something behind it, and then
Mm.
having moving star fields coming through.
Mm.
So it worked really well, actually,
Yeah.
fairly simple, and once you got the idea, worked out how to do it, but very painstaking and time
Mm.
consuming, because when you think it's going to be on a big screen, you want everything to happen really slowly. So
Yeah.
how do you
Yeah.
check that back when it's 30 minutes into the you have to watch
Yeah.
it from the start,
Ah.
and then
Yeah.
you get to it and you think, that's too quick, it's moving too fast, I've got to
Oh
redo it.
no.
So it took ages, about six
Yeah.
months just
Wow.
doing that.
A
um,
labor of love.
it was very much a labour of love, but the great thing is, all the Hubble space image is public domain, so it's free to use. So
Oh, great.
it wasn't a costly exercise, so that was great.
Just a time consuming one.
Yeah, and then the other issue we had with that was that two of the concerts ended up being in planetariums,
Right.
which was absolutely marvelous. So we were able to project the visuals onto the dome. So we didn't have a screen as such. It's like people were reclined in comfy chairs, and it was quite something.
I bet you wish you could have somehow snuck into the audience and watched yourself performing this to the.
Well, I'd been up there to sort of test it out with the tech guys a few days before the gig and make sure everything was working. Another problem we had, of course, is that if you project a standard image onto a dome, all the geometry goes AWOL. So if you have anything like if you project a square, it becomes like all curved edges and bulges one way and it's sucked in another way.
Yeah.
So the opening sequence actually uses footage from a rocket looking down.
Yeah.
So you've got a rocket. It's about a 3-minute sequence I created, and you'll actually see the Earth disappear behind you.
Yeah.
And I created some sort of dramatic sounds, music to go with that intro sequence. But that couldn't be projected on the dome because it looked ridiculous, because it's an actual thing, and it needed the correct geometry. So we overcame it. I won't bore you with the technical details, but we did overcome it. And then once we got past that and into the space visuals, because nebulas have no actual shape, they technically do, unless you're an astronomer, you're not going to notice. It worked absolutely fine on the dome. So you're suddenly immersed in these beautiful colours, and then you've got the sound coming at you from all angles. It just worked, better than I'd ever hoped, really.
Wow.
And we will be doing more, hopefully.
I was going to ask you that.
There again.
That's good. I hope I'm lucky enough to be in England when one of those concerts is happening. But I'm
it's a
really
huge amount of work.
Really pleased to hear you say that you'd like to do more of that. And with Nigel and Brian are both amazing, aren't they, as well?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the two of them. I mean, Brian's glissando guitar is a technique that people probably aren't familiar with, but it's a technique pioneered by people like Steve Hillage, who was the guitarist in Gong, which Brian has a lot to do with that band. And it involves sort of bowing the strings with a metal object and changing the note by moving the fretboard fingers are, I believe, kept still, and you move it like this. But it creates this siren-like, real expressive organic sound when it's through echoes and reverbs. Beautiful sound, perfect for deep skies. And it was Nigel who spotted that would work when I played him the first demos of the first album back in 2002, I think. So, and Nigel's contributed. He's I call him the bubble meister. he creates these synth bubble effects on them. Something that doesn't really come naturally to me, but he's a master at it. Really, in just the right place. You've got just the right sort of sound, and sometimes I'll catch his eye across the live gig and do this bubble sound has just gone up. No, brilliant, really sort of fantastic musicians. Really know what they're doing, and lovely people. So glad they're working on it with me.
I think one of your most well-known couple of albums would be Clouds and Clouds 2. Am I right?
Okay, yeah, I probably agree with that.
Yeah. And interestingly, you are a qualified pilot, which gives you a lot of first-hand experience below and above the clouds. So did that play a big part in inspiring those two albums, or?
Yes, it did. There was also an album called Aerial Vistas in 1996, which sort of is a little clue to my obsession with getting up there and looking down and seeing views from the air. Aerial Vistas, views from the air. That was in 1996. 2000 was the release date of Clouds, so I was working on that in 1999.
Yeah.
And I wasn't a qualified pilot at the time, so that was still my sort of my image of trying to sort of personify these clouds in music, taking for example, a cumulus cloud. What would that sound like in music? What feeling does it give me when I look from the ground upwards to that type of cloud?
Yeah.
And it's a fair weather cloud, so the track is very sort of light and airy.
Yeah.
Whereas cumulonimbus, the storm cloud, it's a dramatic sort of distant anvil shape, quite foreboding but majestic, and that's reflected in the music. I realised probably around sort of 2011, 2012, that there were a whole load more cloud types, because I was by then a qualified pilot and done all the meteorological training that you need to do. So I was suddenly aware of all these other cloud types.
Yeah,
So I thought, there's another album there.
Yeah, of course.
So I did a follow-up on my own label, Clouds 2. And that included, for example, the lesser known types of cloud. The first track is called Pileus. And a pileus cloud is from the Latin word meaning cap. When you've got a storm cloud, the rising updrafts, it forces the layer of air above it to rise, and it gradually condenses into a cloud. So you get a little cloud that looks like a cap on top of the main cloud, and that's called a pileus. But I used the same chord sequence in that I did in the Cumulus track, which is the first track on the Clouds album. So you've kind of got that sort of etheric link, if you like, between the two albums.
Yeah. Nice.
But yeah, that was interesting because I did the second album as a pilot, knowing what it looks like down from the air. So
yeah, beautiful.
Sort of that has sort of slightly increased awareness of what it's like to be up there,
Yeah. Oh, they're both beautiful albums. Highly recommend them. So what who have been your main inspirations musically?
Ooh, loads of people. I can pinpoint probably three. Really important, maybe four actually. The first one would have to be Mike Oldfield. His early albums were massively inspirational to me, and there's a well-known story which I won't bore you with now, but I heard Tubular Bells in a school assembly once, and that was the turning point for me. Up to that point, I kind of liked listening to music, but I didn't want to do it myself. I didn't want to do piano lessons. Heard Tubular Bells in a school assembly. A light switch went on in my head, and I was away. There was no stopping me. Music was all I wanted to do. Something happened. Then the second person I would say would be Vangelis, because it was through his Spiral album of 1977, I think. So I would have been 11, about 11. Led me to discover what a synthesizer was. Again, there's a story attached to that, which I won't bore you with now. But definitely Mike Oldfield, Vangelis. Brian Eno, on his ambient work, opened my eyes to another sort of use of music, if you like, as a background environment. Very sort of inspirational, and lovely sounds that he gets. He calls himself a non-musician, which I get, but he's very musical in his production. So the studio is his instrument, if you like, and that concept as well.
Yes,
I totally get, because in a way it's my instrument as well.
Yes,
creating the sound in the studio that makes the music. And the other person I would say is Tomita.
Oh, yeah.
Isao Tomita, the Japanese synth pioneer, who would primarily do synthesizer arrangements of classical works rather than composing his own stuff. But if you've not heard any, check out Host Planets. Some of the sounds on there, when you think what it was done with, modular mode systems, monophonic, are just mind-blowing. And I can remember, again, a very sort of inspirational moment for me was just having got hold of this Tomita Planets, it's called, Host Planets, arranged for synthesizer. A friend at school actually recorded it for me because his mum had a copy. It was banned in the UK because Holt's daughter thought that it ruined her father's work, which is completely wrong. It beautifies an already marvelous work, in my opinion. But for example, the Venus track, it's just so gorgeous on synthesizer. Tomita's arrangement of it. it's so painstaking. It's true to the original, built up with monophonic synthesizers. It's just astonishing. And I can
Mm.
remember, yeah, this formative moment standing. My parents' house used to back onto a golf course, and around November, I get home from school, and first thing I do, put my headphones on, listen to
Mm.
music.
Mm.
Standing at that fence, on looking onto the golf course, there was a lovely oak tree in the middle, and the mists would be just rising in November,
Yeah.
and it would sort of mask everything below
Mm.
it like a sort of
Mm.
sea of mist. And you
Yeah,
could just see this
beautiful.
oak tree coming out as the sun was going down. It'll be glowing pink.
Oh,
I'm
wow.
listening to this version of Venus by Tomita.
Wow.
Just there's a moment in there, still makes the hairs on the back of my neck stand up on end
Yeah.
near the end. Fifth person I've just thought of, Yasos.
Right.
I can't, I couldn't not mention Yatos in my inspirational people, because he, to me, is the true pioneer of what we call New Age music.
Right.
There are a couple of potential candidates, but for me, he is 100% the New Age pioneer, creating sounds back in mid 70s that
Mm.
you just
Mm.
hadn't heard before.
Yeah.
Absolutely pioneering. I first heard it in the old Laserium show, where my mum and dad kindly took me to the Laser Rock 2 show at the London Planetarium. And
Oh,
they gave you
wow.
a playlist of what the music was. And it was all a laser show on the planetarium dome.
Oh, that's
Fantastic.
cool.
With a great sound system. They used a Zeiss projector to project the star field, and it was wonderful. But
Mm.
one of the tracks was called The Angels of Comfort by Yasos. And I could not get this anywhere. I eventually tracked it down on cassette at the Festival of Mind, Body, Spirit.
Wow.
And I absolutely loved it. And then I went there the next year and got the other one. And there was a sound on there that I literally couldn't work out how it was done,
Mm.
when it was done, because it was pre MIDI, pre polyphonic synthesizers, really early.
Mm.
And it was just like nothing I'd ever heard before. And it made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up again.
Mm.
So fast forward 20 years to getting the internet, I was able to actually email Yastas
Oh,
and asked him how
wow.
he did it.
Wow.
And he told me how he did it, and it's astonishing. Whether it's for this forum or not, I don't know. I won't go into all the detail of it, but it was a really amazing answer he gave.
Yeah.
And he told me why it made the hairs stand up on the back of
Ah.
my neck. And what he said was, he wasn't surprised at all. He said, no, that's because that's the sound your soul hears when it sojourns between lifetimes.
Wow.
So,
Amazing. Wow.
at the
That's
time I
mind
thought,
blowing.
whoa, that's mind blowing.
Yeah.
But it
Wow.
just gives you a little insight into
Yeah.
what Yasos is tapping into.
Mm. Mm.
So I highly recommend his work, and the sounds, fabulous otherworldly sounds on his music.
That
So
must
yeah,
have
he was a
been
big influence.
that must have been special for you to be able to connect directly with
Oh,
him. That
absolutely. I mean, it was really early days of email. I literally typed it out like an A4 letter.
mm,
I couldn't believe that the following morning there's a reply. It was just like,
yeah.
yeah, we take it all for granted now. So
Yeah.
it was amazing. And I'm delighted that, he's now a really good friend, and we swap albums and chat. And,
Oh, that's beautiful. Yeah. That's really awesome.
so it's been great. Yeah.
They're amazing pioneers, or each and every one of those people you mentioned,
Yeah, all
and
doing stuff that no one had ever done before. They were the first people to do it, really.
yeah, and big thanks to you for continuing, you know, evolving the whole
Well,
sound and
we
that,
try.
yeah, that whole field of music, and for all the pleasure you bring to a lot of people. Kev, you've created many albums. How many albums have you made now?
It's in the mid 30s, I believe. I've actually kind
Wow,
of lost track of it a little bit, but it's about 34-ish,
wow,
35 perhaps.
gosh,
I
yeah,
couldn't tell you exactly.
that's very prolific.
But that's
I
over a 30-year period. So
Yeah, but you've obviously been very consistent in in keeping up to your wonderful work. Um,
the great thing about this sort of music is that it is timeless.
yeah,
And,
yeah,
people are still listening to the album, the Water Music that I did in 1992. I still get comments, so it's great that it doesn't seem to age,
That's the best compliment of all, isn't it? That it can stand the test of time for that long. Gosh, that's a massive body of work. Is there anything within that body of work that you're most proud about?
I don't think I could pinpoint any one thing. What I am most proud of really is the sort of letters and emails I've received over the years telling me how it's helped people through difficult times in their life. And I've had letters saying that, they've had kids that have been very difficult that have suddenly sort of responded to my music and stuff like that, just to help people over bereavements and illnesses. And I never really set out with that intention, but it's wonderful that that's happened. And I feel very proud of the music, really, in general, that I've created.
Yeah, it's a wonderful legacy to be able to create and to, leave long after we're gone, and especially in your case, it's something to be very proud of. And
I think that's what I'm most proud of is the as I say, the way it seems to have been able to help people.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, I can personally vouch for that myself as well. So again, many thanks for the amazing work
Thank
you
you.
do, Kev. I can't wait to start working on some guitar parts for your new album. And
I'm very honoured to have you present on the albums. Yeah, and thanks for all you've done over the past albums as well.
No, the pleasure's all mine, mate.
Always a joy to work with you.
Likewise, and thanks very much for being with us today.
My pleasure. And thanks for inviting me.
That pop-up studio of yours looks absolutely beautiful, and I'm not surprised such beautiful work is coming out of that environment. So
it's a very inspirational place.
Good luck with the rest of the album, and thanks a lot for having a chat with me today, mate.
No worries. See you soon.